Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of Business Unboxed with your hosts Kelly, a chartered accountant, and Cory, a business owner. And today we kind of thought we would touch on an episode that I think we've briefly touched on before, but probably not to this depth, and that is that the fact that we are siblings and that we have been in business together in the past, and we're actually planning on being in business again in the not too distant future. And so, what kind of, things we've learned from the last time we were in business together, and we might go over some ways that we are going to, counteract some of those things that we learned going into our new business so that we, have a better understanding, maybe. I felt like we didn't really not have an understanding of the first one, but yeah. So, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. So, for a bit of context.
What do you mean by the first one? You mean Maya?
Yeah.
I thought we set that up pretty well.
We did, but we didn't it was a wee bit different because we were all 33%. We were all like even partners. And I feel like you wanted to take it in a different direction, and I just felt like it just kind of wasn't as structured as what we're going into with this one. I feel like there's not as much planning that happened to organise before we started who was going to be responsible for what and who had to listen to who, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
So for a bit of context, as Cory said, Maya was our first business, and we do plan on doing a full episode diving into that whole situation, probably in the second half of the season. So if you guys don't know, we are doing a bit of a break in the middle of the year. So this is coming to the end of part one of the season. So this will be the second last episode. And so towards the end of this year's season, part two, we'll do like a full episode on Maya, right from the start of the idea all the way through to how it ended. But for this one, we are actually planning, and we've kind of hinted at a new business that we are going into. And so working with family, a lot of people have the, thought that it should be avoided. And I get that to a certain extent. If you don't get along well, if you've got very differing opinions, if you work in very different ways, you can easily find yourself in a situation where you butt heads and it can destroy that family relationship that you had with them. Same with best friends, I suppose. Like a lot of people also say don't go into business with friends because, there's just a lot of room for conflict in business, and with the people you're close to, you want to try and avoid that. So as I said, we are looking at starting a new business together, and we have been in business before. So one thing that we want to start off with going into this new business, a memorandum of understanding, because you can have a company constitution, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, so constitution about having more of a, I think it's legally binding, like more of a structure around shares and shareholders. So if someone wants to sell shares, then there's a process they have to go through. Yeah, and it just, if anything was to happen, it gives both parties a document that was agreed on. So then you can go, well, these are what we agreed on when we entered this relationship. Therefore, we both agreed and signed this is the understanding from both parties. In worst case, you've done something that is in violation of what we had agreed. So here we are, kind of thing. And I think it's important just to air out all the different scenarios. How do both parties get paid? Who's responsible for what decision? Who's responsible for marketing, sales, for finance, for looking for new clients, for, whatever it might be. It just helps kind of give both parties some guidelines as to how you deal with certain situations, who's responsible for what both people want to get out of the transaction. Mm-hmm. Everyone understands everyone's personal situation.
Yes. And so when we started Maya, we did not have that.
No.
I think we did at some point once we kind of started it. We sat down together. There was three of us, we sat down and we did write out like, okay, you're kind of responsible for this, you're responsible for
Mm.
that, you're
Bit
responsible
of
for that.
roles.
But it wasn't set out before we started the business, and we didn't have that full understanding. We kind of was making it up as we went, I think.
Yeah.
Another thing that we're doing differently is in the new business, I'll be the only director and the primary shareholder,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of, I guess, I know I've heard other business people say this. I can't remember exactly who, but I've heard a few people say that you should never really go 50-50 in a business. I know that, Cory, you've gone 50-50 in one of your other businesses, but I've heard people say that it's very, very hard then if you do have a different of opinion, you both have equal weight in what happens. And so sometimes that can actually make things more difficult because there isn't one person that can make the final call. If you both completely disagree and cannot come to an agreement in for whatever reason, because you're both equal shareholders, you technically can't do anything because you need majority vote to make a decision or to move whatever motion you're trying to move.
Caveat there.
Mm-hmm.
So so yes, obviously having the majority shares technically means you have majority say, right? Um, but you also have to think. So yes, you might have the majority say, which means at the end of the day, if there's a disagreement, then you can have the final say. But that can still cause resentment from the party
Yes,
that have the majority shares, and then
100%.
that might mean that the minority shareholder wants to leave because the other person might be making all the decisions that I don't agree with, and then now you've got this thing where if someone wants to leave, that person either has to buy them out or they're going to go and list the shares for sale, and so that can cause a conflict as well.
Yes.
Um, it does give you, I guess, some rights as to what can happen. But for us, where I own 50%, we have an agreement that we have a third party that's the decider factor.
Yeah.
So if there's something we really both can't get past and we are completely opposite and no party is willing to negotiate, which comes down to who you pick as a business partner, right? Usually
100%.
you've got someone that's either willing to negotiate or it's people that are fair that can see both sides and it's like, okay, well, look, I don't really agree, but I'm happy if you want to go ahead with that, you go ahead with that. And,
Mm-hmm.
but we have a third party. So if we both really oppose,
Yeah.
then we pitch our side, I guess, to that person. That person makes the decision.
Yes, and I think it's a good thing to have because, yeah, if you are 50-50, and then you've got that third person, then that's great because then you can still make decisions, or you go 51-49 or whatever. But like Cory said, you ultimately have to pick the right business partner because being in business is not an easy thing to be in. It involves not only money, which is, I think, like one of the number one reasons that most couples argue, but it also is something that families argue about and have fallings out over about. And yeah, so money is a huge thing. And then obviously, I'm working harder than you, whatever the arguments are. So yeah, always
Another
good to
caveat.
have.
Sorry,
Mhm.
hang on.
So yeah, it's always good to have that kind of backup plan of, okay, what happens if we don't agree or whatever, but you need to pick the right person to start off with. And so I think that's another difference. Like I said, I'll be the majority shareholder, whereas in our previous business, I believe all three of us were directors and all three of us were 33%, where it was like even
Yeah,
keel with the shares. So it was three people that all needed to equally agree on everything technically. Now, obviously, did it play out
which
like
is
that?
fine.
No. Yeah. But like, it didn't really play out as three equal voices because, we've got a different dynamic. I mean, it was
Mm.
brother, sister, and then two people that were partners. So we have like a
Me and
weird,
Jason.
yeah, like it was a weird situation because it was not just three individual people going into business together. It was a brother and sister relationship and then a partner relationship in that three-way as well. So
Mm.
yes, but that is something that we're doing differently. And so obviously with those two things, it means that the business is predominantly going to be mine. It means I can kind of take it how I want to, but also we have written in the understanding document of where we plan to take the business, what it plans to do. We're obviously going to be sitting down and working through the values and mission and the branding, and all that stuff is still going to be together. It's still combined. So very much a lot of Cory's input is going to be in there. He's going to be working with me a lot in it, but he's not going to be the primary person who's responsible, I guess, for the business.
I'm almost like not a silent partner, but like an advisor.
Yeah. Yes.
What I was going to say before was that I come across a situation where there was a company with 4 shareholders, and 2 of the minority shareholders wanted to leave because of a conflict, or where the majority shareholder or holders were doing something in a way that the minority ones didn't like. But because there was that conflict, it makes it quite hard for them to exit because they need to sell. Like, this business was worth money. You know, when you sell shares, usually the person buying wants to know what type of business you're getting into, right? And so they need to be up front really and go, well, actually, we're exiting because we have a bit of a conflict here, and so who's going to want to buy into that? So, having minority or majority isn't always, I don't know, what's the phrase? There's always going to be pros and cons for both. And so my point was the fact that it's the best thing you can do is to make sure you get into the business with the right person, regardless of how many years you have or don't have. It's the person you're going into business with that you need to really do due diligence. And you set out those clear expectations and boundaries from the beginning, and hopefully you both have mutual respect for each other.
Yes, respect would be is a huge thing when it comes to being business partners. On that, Cory, what are some of your top tips then when you've obviously partnered with people in the past with multiple businesses? What are some of those things that you look for in somebody that you plan on going into business with? Because this will be your 3rd business that you plan on going into with somebody else.
4th, actually.
4th, not legal entity though. One's technically combined. Okay. 4th. Technically 4th now. Yes, that's right.
Tips. I think, generally speaking, you want to have a business partner with complementary strengths. And so by that I mean you don't necessarily want 2 people that are really, really good at sales, or 2 people that are really good at the profession, right? The actual doing of the whatever you're doing, the service. You want to have someone that's kind of good at sales, or someone that's good at marketing, or understands that market at least, and someone that's good at doing the actual job or the service or making the product, or someone that's good at procurement or finance or operations, so that you've got different parts. If you think of all the hats, right? If you break down all the hats into 3, there's 3 main parts to a business. There's finance, operations, and then marketing and sales are joined together. So you really want to try and have, if you're going in with 2 people or more, you really want to have someone or those 2 people that are wearing different hats, so that you've got 2 different sets of strengths. I think it's probably important for both the people to have a passion about the business or what the business is doing, but more importantly, that passion isn't just a how do I say this, like a quick idea passion, and it's like, oh yeah, that'd be cool to start a business, and you work through it. It's something that's kind of been talked about for quite a long time. You've negotiated, you've talked about it, you've worked out how it might work, and that it might be for years that you've done that for. before it turns into something. And then you kind of know that it's not something that's just created out of a fun, interesting idea.
Mm.
It's something that someone's really passionate about. Um, yeah. And I think, the third part that we've already kind of mentioned is having an understanding of both parties. So who's doing what, who wants to be doing what's happening in each person's personal world. So for my business partner and I, we have two different things going on, um, which we both know about. We're both open about our personal lives, and so what the part of the reason that we merged benefited both of those personal lifestyle changes that we wanted to make. So, if you've got, one single guy and one guy, for example, with a huge family, there's going to be different levels of energy and different levels of commitment potentially. And so they both need to communicate with, if this person suddenly has family things they need to attend to, or they can't work as much because they need to, I don't know, whatever, right? You kind of need to find a way that how that's going to work in a partnership.
100%. Yeah.
Another thing that I went through is figuring out a fair way to be remunerated.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite a big sticking point because sometimes you might have a person that's really good at sales and a person that's good at doing. Now, the person that's good at doing might take them 10 or 20 hours to do a job, right? But the person that's good at sales got that job, and maybe they had that job or got that job because they were just good at networking. And so they didn't have to spend, maybe it was just a conversation with someone and they got a job and that job was worth quite a bit of money. So how do you remunerate the person that, that's just good at doing what they're doing and doing sales versus the person that has to spend 20 hours doing something? It doesn't mean that the person that's going to spend 20 hours should necessarily get more money because there's 20 hours of work involved than the person that got the job. So, how do you make that fair between the two parties?
Mm.
One person's the director and one person isn't. That person, depending on the situation, should also be remunerated because a director's responsibilities are more than just a shareholder's or a staff member. So, if you're in business with someone and you're like, well, I don't want to be a director, I want you to take care of that. I'll just be a shareholder and an employee of the business. Then, there's, and again, another dynamic and a different set of skills and responsibilities there. The directors are legally responsible for the operation of the business.
Yep. It is a lot of
Instead
responsibility.
in our situation, you're running the business anyway, right? So it makes sense for you to do that. It's not like an extra thing.
Mm.
But so yeah, there's just you just kind of find the right person, which is very easier said than done.
Mm.
Go through due diligence, which I know many people have, and they still have issues. But do as much as you can. Have an MOU or some other formal agreement,
Mm-hmm.
and literally, my advice probably is to spend hours on it, like hours and hours and hours, refining it, thinking of every different situation that could possibly occur. What happens if I have to take leave because of something, because I fall? What happens if I end up in hospital for 3 months? What happens if I can't work? What happens if I, want a sick day? What, do I get paid for that? Do I not get paid for that? You have to think of every different scenario so that when it occurs, you've got your process and procedure there to go, okay, well, we agreed that in this type of situation, this is what's going to happen.
Mm.
And then, oh, but I thought this, or but I thought that. It's all been agreed upon before.
Yeah. And just to clarify for any super nerdy people out there, we're not talking going into as detailed as Janet Leonard's roommate agreement. We're not saying go to that level, but we are just
Not
saying
quite.
general business operations, personal health, and what people could go through while you're in business together are all topics that should be discussed and, I guess, decided on what would happen, so that you know.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, I think we'll wrap this episode up here. That's some good tips from Cory on, I guess, how to maybe counteract any family drama before going into business with family or anybody for that case, really. And yeah, you guys have learned a little bit more about the business that we used to have and maybe some things that we're doing differently to help with our family and business relationship. So yeah, we hope that you enjoyed this, and we'll catch you in the next one, which will be the last one for part 1 of this season. So stay tuned.